How to talk to your friends about your narcissistic parent. Well, let's say you've done a ton of work to take stock of how you had to adapt to a narcissistic parent's abusiveness. Now that you live with this hard-earned awareness of the truth about your parent, you may be talking to, say, your longtime friend from high school who asks you how that parent is doing and maybe tells you how much they've always liked that parent. What do you do? Well, on the one hand, making the choice to inform this person about how this parent behaved behind closed doors with you might feel like the most honest. But on the other hand, this would be privileging this person with a lot of personal information about you, and maybe you're not sure if you can trust their discretion and respect for your contrary experience to theirs. And on the third hand, if you smile and nod, or would it feel like you're colluding with that parent's efforts at disguising who they really are to the rest of the world? Okay, and on the fourth hand, what if this friend doesn't believe you? Or worse, what if they think there's something wrong with you for having such anger towards your own parent? Well, you have to end a ton of long-time friendships over this issue. Or even you might have the worry, will I have any friends left? Well, today's video was inspired by a comment from the YouTube viewer named Basil Rose, which now that I say it out loud, I wonder if it's a play on Axl Rose, and if so, that's really clever, and if not, never mind. But this viewer put it this way. They asked, please do a video on how to get through to friends who only knew the charming persona of a narcissistically abusive parent and can't fathom the need that survivors have as adults to be believed about what was happening behind closed doors when they were growing up. We don't want to walk away from these longtime friends, but it creates a rift when they don't believe our stories that contradict their own experience of the person whom they think they know. It makes it even trickier when the abusive parent has passed away and a friend is reluctant to talk badly of the dead. Well, I really appreciate Basil Rose's comment and have found this concern to arise all the time in working with survivors in therapy or in the Facebook group that accompanies my online course. You know, basically the question of how to stay true to oneself when people who have otherwise been your allies seem or are reluctant or refusing to believe your experience with your narcissistically abusive parent. And in today's video, I'm going to describe this conflict in more detail so that you can know that this is a common challenge for many survivors of narcissistic abuse. Next, I'm going to reframe this challenge to a question of self-care and boundaries for yourself. And last, I'm going to offer a way to counter fears of retaliation for setting boundaries around what sort of response you want from those close to you when you share your experience with them. My name's Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in helping individuals recover from narcissistic abuse in individual therapy and through my online course and the accompanying private Facebook group. Together, we undertake this process of recovery using a map to get to their new home within themselves and new or re-engineered relationships with others. And the map, I think of containing 3 pillars of recovery that let the survivor know how they got here, where they want to go, and how to get there. And that translates to the first pillar of making sense of what happened so you know it wasn't your fault. The second pillar of gaining distance, whether psychological, emotional, or physical, from the narcissistic abuser. And the third pillar of living in defiance of the narcissist's rules. And lastly, one can't do this in a vacuum, so it's essential to find and participate in communities of people who get you, validate you, and support you on this path. And that's where the accompanying Facebook group comes in. So people in this course are not alone as they traverse the path back to themselves. So today's video falls under the pillar 3 of living in defiance of the narcissist's rules. And you can learn more about my online course by finding the link in the description box below or by clicking here. Also, if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to hit the subscribe button and turn notifications on so that you're alerted when I post new videos on this topic. Well, the map of recovery that I cover in my online course of recovering from narcissistic abuse I think is important because survivors get to build a new and much more compassionate frame of reference for themselves. In broad strokes, this kind of amounts to moving from a frame of reference where you feel like a burden to others, that your needs are outlandish and illegitimate, and not to be taken seriously. And you move towards a frame of reference where you know your own worth and can see that expressing what you need to select people is a privilege you are offering them to participate in a close and real relationship with you. And I think all of this has a lot to do with the question posed in today's video topic. So once you have established this new, and I would argue much more accurate, frame of reference for who you are and what you deserve from yourself and others, then how do you deal with a longtime friend who refuses to believe you? Well, as trying as these moments can be, I think they can also afford an important opportunity. So in order to survive narcissistic abuse from a parent who cultivates a very different persona to people outside the home, one often has to compartmentalize your own experience along the same lines. And I'm referring to survivors who experience their narcissistically abusive parent to be capable of ruthless attack on them when they were alone with that parent, but then offering the rest of the world a charming smile at the drop of a hat. And in order to stay bonded to the parent in a way that was needed for survival, the child in this position may have had to create a similar partition within themselves. On one side of this partition would be the good narcissistic parent who's charming and charismatic when being observed by outside parties. And on the other side of the partition is the bad narcissistic parent who mercilessly berates, belittles, and devalues you when they knew they could get away with it behind closed doors. And it may have been adaptive to keep the bad parent behind the partition in your own mind so that you weren't constantly dogged with the torment of knowing what sort of person you were dependent upon as a child in that situation. In essence, you may have had to create a sort of behind closed doors experience of this parent in your own mind as a way to protect yourself from knowing just how dangerous they were when you have no option at that time to escape them. Well, the opportunity I mentioned earlier is to bring the bad parent out from behind the closed doors in your own mind and in the minds of others, like in this example. And this situation can only be experienced as an opportunity when you have accrued enough of a sense of safety in your recovery process. And that is that you have forged enough psychological and emotional distance from the narcissistic abuser, made sense of their treatment of you to know that it was really not your fault, and are practicing living in defiance of the narcissist's rules for you. And maybe most importantly, you've established relationships with other safe people who readily believe and support you in your experience. I think traction is needed in these three pillars of recovery, along with a sense of connection to others who kind of have your back. And so with this sort of traction in hand, you might now get to regard this situation with the friend as an opportunity to break down the secrecy that the narcissistically abusive parent cultivated around their mistreatment of you. So what might this look like? You could experiment with saying something like, I had a very different experience of this parent. They showed a very different side to me than they showed to people outside the home. Next, I think it's important to remember that choosing to respond in this manner to a friend with such a different impression of your narcissistic parent actually allows you to gauge that friend's response and assess whether it fits with your current definition of safe other people. And if someone is immediately incredulous, disbelieving, or dismissive of your comment, how do you want to make sense of that information? Or if they surprise you and show compassion and remorse that you had to endure this kind of treatment from the parent, how do you want to make sense of that information? If they kind of glibly change the subject and don't address your comment, well, then what? And all of this is information you get to use to assess their capacity to be the kind of friend you want to have in your life. And I think it's very important to shift the frame of this situation from whether you, the survivor, will be believed by the friend to whether this friend will respond in a way that you find to be helpful. That is, you're not auditioning for someone else's acceptance of your reality, but rather seeing whether this person belongs amongst those you want to keep close to you. And this is why it's so important to come at this challenge after having gained traction in your recovery, so that you know that you have the sort of existential heft to consider your own judgments of others rather than solely their judgments of you. So if your friend comes up short in their response to you, then you might consider limiting how close you get to them. Although, this person may not have ill intent towards you, their inability to provide an experience in the friendship that you need in order to feel safe with them may indicate that they might not meet your personal criteria for being a safe person to you. And this understanding may seem overly punitive or result in questions as to whether you're being too picky or intolerant of others. And you may also anticipate a wave of dread over a feared retaliation along these lines. Something like, how dare you write me off for having a different opinion than you? Could be, one example. And I think these thoughts and fears are very understandable and may reflect one's system's attempt to stay safe in the old way. When valuing what you needed for yourself constituted a threat to your survival, it may have been quite necessary to disavow your needs, and particularly listening to those needs. So by acting in this way with your needs in the center of your life, you're charting new territory, and your system may take some time to adjust to know it's now safe to do this. Well, I hope today's video was helpful in reframing the situation when a friend doesn't believe you about your experience with a narcissistic parent. It may actually afford you an opportunity to know who you want to keep close to you versus who may not be safe to keep as close. Well, thank you, Basil Rose, for this comment and the thoughts that it kind of led to. And for everyone's continued engagement with this channel, I would encourage people to continue to post in the comments section topics for videos they'd like to see, and I'm keeping a catalog of those, and we'll be creating more videos based off those topics in the future. Well, thank you, and I look forward to posting a new video next week on Friday. Take care.